And I don't even really want to deliver this information, but it has to be said. And with that as my premise, I'll get into today's topic.
This hearing is available to watch live online, and a recording will be available on the committee's website, which is www.health.senate.gov. It's important to be clear that the hearing will be shown from gavel to gavel in its entirety
At that website,
by anyone from the moment we start until the very end when we stop.
except me.
Due to the limited seating, representatives from the press are working as a pool to relay their observations to their colleagues.
And that's about as much as I can do.
Staff present have been reminded about the safety guidelines put in place by the attending physician. We all wore our masks.
That part.
I'm not going to wear mine during.
And so he said to share with my network that information. Did you see that? I'm going to do it one more time.
Third, to maintain social distancing, we have very limited seating.
Encourage to maintain social distancing.
To attend. However, hearing is available to watch live online, and a recording will be available on the committee's website.
That's the link.
www.health.senate.gov.
This is vital information, so I got to share it, but there's one point that needs to be made to drive this thing home.
By anyone from the moment we start until the very end when we start.
And I'll get into today's topic.
Due to the limited seating, representatives from the press are working as a pool to relay their observations to their colleagues. And senators and staff present have been reminded about the safety guidelines put in place by the attending physician.
Safety guidelines put in place by the physician. I'm going to show him one more time, Brother Danubian. I'm going to show him one more time. And then I'm going to get into today's topic.
Watching seating has been spaced so that we're 6 feet apart. Second, we've made it possible for
so some safety guidelines put in place. We see that
via video conference if they choose to do so, and several have. Third, to maintain social distancing, we have very limited seating, so we don't have room for members of the public to attend. However, this hearing is available to watch live online, and a recording will be available on the committee's website.
Give them the website.
www.health.senate.gov. It's important to be clear that the hearing will be shown from gavel to gavel in its entirety.
www.health.senate.gov. That's the source.
Unedited by anyone from the moment we start until the very end when we stop. Fourth, due to the limited seating, representatives from the press are working as a pool to relay their observations to their colleagues. And senators and staff present have been reminded about the safety guidelines put in place by the attending physician.
Safety guidelines put in place by the attending physician. All right. So now you have your authority and you have your source. Now watch what he does.
Physician.
1, 2, 3. Now see, they might try to take it down because it is narrated. But Brother Danubian, you caught that, right? You got the source, you got the authority, you got the highest representation of it. And look, and they said there were safety guidelines put in place. There were safety guidelines put in place. Huh? Look what he got in his hand right there. This one gonna be real short, B1 Nyla says. This is the people who gave you the authority. They just gave you the source. They gave you, this is right there at the Senate meeting. It was live. And bam. What's wrong with that, Brother Danubian? And then look what he did with his hand now. So not only is he touching the outside of that same mask where that same protective gear was supposed to be containing whatever was trying to come in that mask or whatever was going out that mask, it doesn't matter because he's just put his entire hand on it and moved that very same hand to the same papers that will be passed to someone else.
During the hearing.
Also on that hand, you see a ring finger. So guess who else can be transmitted that same bad habit?
Since we're sick.
I think the reason why they are moving away from this as a conversation is because it's an unrealistic expectation. The level of competence that it requires is just really above the average American. And this dude is the senator himself who has the highest authority telling them what the safety guidelines are. And 5 minutes into his speech, he does something that any other person who has a little bit of coronanoia would have said not to do. Anybody with some real training would have said that's not how you handle that type of protective gear. But unfortunately, they're not competent. And this is who we are told that we have to trust. And so this is the United States Senate hearing on new technologies to produce coronavirus tests. Of course, it's going to be necessary to have some type of coronavirus test. You also know that the race is underway for the vaccination. Whether or not those things will become mandatory, we don't know, but we do know that there is a heavy investment in technologies to get them there because they obviously need some type of vaccination. They will not be able to, even distancing and social distancing or whatever that is. Do you wear a mask? Do you wear gloves? All of these different ways of the conversation moving. It's still the expectation that that individual is competent enough to be able to properly execute those things. And this is an example of not being able to do so at the highest levels. Now, what else are you trying to implement when you're saying wear protective gear? What else are you trying to implement when you say social distancing? There's some cultural nuances and taboos that make it unrealistic. At some point, they will want to go back to the handshakes. At some point, they'll go back to the less of a distance is necessary. And at some point, these are the conversations that are being held. But there's another conversation underway. And I'm not going to be long here, probably 15 minutes, not too long-winded, because I was observing the African Americans at the same highest levels in their response. And I shared that information on my last video. Be sure to check it out. What it was calling attention to is the extinction level event, according to Brooks, the COO of Combs Enterprises. A global pandemic and the response on the economic sector, highly represented by financial folks, but a very diverse panel that included the LGBT representative from some red ribbon rainbow organization, CARE Act or something. And while we know we ought to care, there are still some people who just won't get it. The conversation goes, there was an opportunity to get yourself inside of the queue for something more than a stimulus check. And for whatever reason, African-American names were not ending up on those queues. They could share the banks in the state. They could share the government was the one where they finally started seeing big numbers of people filing for unemployment. But that wasn't the one they were talking about either. There was another queue that African Americans were supposed to be taking advantage of, and our names were not being registered on. Big businesses, we've heard the story go out that they started snatching them up, and even to the point where some were said to be giving them back. But the conversation that's not being held, though, is the African Americans who do have some form of business, and maybe there is some bank out there that has $5,000, $10,000 with your name on it, but you didn't get in the queue. And the 0% loans is probably mostly for those folks who hire folks. So if you've ever had to employ yourself, self-proprietor, LLC, and all of those things, independent contractors was the one where if you had that question, you needed to ask it to an actual representative. They had the representative standing live by. That was important for Black businesses as they continue to execute on their, at-home strategy, their quarantine strategies, their conscientious objection to vaccinations, their disagreement with the reporting. Look, even if they were symptomatic, they said the African Americans were highest in like Chicago, highest in like New York. And even though it was said that they were highest, it's still giving you one major clue too. they were highest to also have reported those symptoms. But we're dealing with folks who, when we first brought this to you back on March 10th, check out that video as well. They were told just to wash their hands and they wouldn't do that. And so the economy then was just said, shut down, everybody stop. Look at the data from March 10th, around there, March 15th. Go to John Hopkins. If you don't got it, then check out my old video. I can also share those PowerPoints with you upon request. You got my email, right? But at that time, there was 14 days to stop the spread. On average, it was only around 5 to 6 to 7,000 total confirmed new cases in America or in the world per day. And what we've seen here is an explosion. The next line that came after the 14 days, they ran their data, they made the assessment, they said, how do we repackage this? They said, well, this could be overwhelming to our hospitals. So the way that it pivoted was to flatten the curve. And it was the war drums being beat for more money for hospitals. And then there was an awesome race that took place, which was for like ventilators and making sure each hospital had the equipment that it needed in the event of a global pandemic or widespread reporting. At that same time, there was an alternative, which is involuntary hospitalization of every total confirmed. They said we don't have the capacity, which allowed them to extend the right not to just condemn those people to those hospitals that were so overwhelmed or would have been overwhelmed had it not been for a race or a war drum being beat to generate more revenue for them. But they got it. They got some levels of it. But what did you also see? The reports of total confirmed skyrockets. Why? Because that coronanoia kicks up and asymptomatic carriers finally did say, let me take this serious. From there, it's been around 60 to 70, sometimes 1,000 total confirmed cases a day. There is no way that people can say that that curve was flattened or that it stopped the spread. The flattening of the curve then was just only the funding for the hospitals. It wasn't the full containment strategy. Now that those hospitals are finally at capacity to be able to serve in these capacities, opening the border, nah, maybe not. Opening economy, now that's a risk that you just gonna have to be willing to take. Freedoms though, like for real, let me show you this last couple of slides in my 3 minutes, would be to be able to execute this information without it being a copyright strike the full way that I would like to execute it. Which means I would start with this slide and, I'd go into the joke about how incompetent they are. I'd say that from a number of different perspectives. I crack it in a good two-liners maybe. And then I'd add my little animations, of course, with my thinking emoji, because I'm always over analyzing situations and saying, look, it's something bigger than what they're making it. And the reason why they're getting this wrong is because they're missing out on a full containment strategy. I've provided 3 in previous episodes, but on that last emoji, you see that it was pointing towards us. Let me do that one more time, just in case somebody in the back missed it. Let me say it one more time for the people in the back. So I'd start off with this one. I crack a couple of jokes, maybe a good 1 or 2 liner, something like that. Tell you how Senator Alexander really got it wrong. This is a hell of a oops moment that everybody should probably be talking about. It definitely has deeper ramifications. If the senator isn't able to do it, what do you think that the people are doing in your neighborhood who are walking around with that mask on? Do you think they're taking it off appropriately? They're throwing it away, washing it or whatever? Or are they handling it with their hands and still moving around with free hands? The same thing happens there. That points back at our own individual selves. How would you handle the coronavirus response? Is it something that you just accept? Look, that's just going to be what it is. It's in society. These people got it. Or do you actually stay informed by visiting www.health.senate.gov and checking out this entire conversation, the Senate hearing on new technologies to produce coronavirus tests? We know it's not just the test, but it's also that vaccination that they're talking about. And so taking a nose swab is different than actually injecting something in someone. I am a conscientious objector to becoming a human study and them being able to use your body as a temple for whatever it is they want to inject inside of it, for obvious reasons. But if they need one, you can just say religious. Be one, Brother Moses. And let me find one more thing to do over here. All right. And this is the map view. What I typically have conversations on when I'm looking at the world is from a global perspective. And when I mean that, I tend to have the conversation zoomed out a little bit, zoomed in a little bit, looking at the different opportunities that exist. I have that conversation at a big macro level. Why? Because I know what's at stake. That's all I got, and I'm out. Deuces.